Now, when using the page builder, learning how to create a really good row is going to be really important, largely because each of your rows is a call to action on its own. So why don't we create a few to give you a bit of an idea of how to do it best. First, let's just create a new page so we can work from a blank canvas. To note, when you create a new page, you can also clone the page from existing pages in this campaign or scroll down the bottom to find the option for other campaign pages as well. But let's just create our page and we'll start. Now we do have a blank canvas we're working from, and you do, when you do a lot of these sort of campaigns, realize that there's only sort of a few different row types you kind of need most of the time. So what I'm going to do, I'm just going to remove this here, and I'm going to add one of the most common rows, which is a plain 2-column row. And this can be really good for hero banners, which is like the first row of a page. If we add a 2-column row here, we see these settings nice and simple. Now, probably the first thing I want to do is add some of my content in, because I don't need to look great now. I just want to start with my content. So what I can do, I want a heading, so I can go into blocks, heading, paste this here, and I have my heading block. I may want to call this welcome to the challenge. Under this, I want to just put a little bit of copy. So why don't we open our blocks again, and instead of using the heading block for this time, just general copy, we use the paragraph block. If anything is longer than a few words, you always need to use the paragraph block, not the heading block. The heading block is just for headings. Here, what I want to do is I'm just going to paste a little bit of copy in here. I'll just put some lorem ipsum text for the moment. Great. Now I want to probably shorten that up, so let's just get rid of this. Awesome. Now so far I'm doing all right. What I want to do now is I want to add a call to action button. So I'm going to add a couple of buttons in here. If I go into and type in button, I can bring up my buttons block and I can add this in here. Now, first of all, just notice a couple of things. Firstly, we need some help with spacing, and that's fine. Secondly, you have these little blank spaces available here. Good practice always is to remove these. Now, what I want to do is I want to adjust this spacing in this just to give things a little bit more room. Now, the heading's not too bad. The paragraph's all right, but I want to focus on the button block. I need some spacing here. So I'm going to open up at settings. If I go to advanced, I have the option here for top margin and bottom margin. I want to add a little bit of space above the button block. And so I'm going to add 30 pixels. Now it's really important here that you don't just use the slider willy-nilly. What you really want to do is work in increments of 15, 30, 60, 90, 120, always consistent increments so that you find you'll find over time your site looks consistent in what it's doing. Spacing is really important. So I'm just going to save that because I've added 30 pixels of top margin there, and that's given it some space. Well, why don't we duck in now and see if we can improve the row as a whole. And so what we'll do now, let's open up the row settings, and I'm going to again just focus on spacing. Let's go to advanced. And here we have the option for vertical spacing. Now, vertical spacing is the space above on the top side of the row and also the bottom side of the row. So if I did actually drag this, you can actually see the spacing increases up the top and up the bottom. Now, as again, always working in increments of 15. So in most cases, I use 60 in this. And maybe if I really wanted to create a bit more space, I might use 120. But also do notice that you have tablet settings and mobile settings. Typically tablet, you can get away with something close to what is on the desktop, but most of the time with mobile, it will be a little bit shorter, say 60 pixels. All right, we've given it some spacing. That's looking a little bit better, but let's add some life to it. If we open up the row settings, I'm going to add in a background image. All right, background image is in. Great image, but that text is illegible, and we want to make sure that the text is clearly seen and accessible for all. So how will we do that? Well, probably the easiest way would be to add a bit of a gradient background. Let's open up the row, and if we scroll down, we can see a little option for background fade. If I drag this across, I'm going to go up to say 80. you will see that it's actually using white as its background color. But I want to change that. So with the background color, if I change that to black, I can now see that it's actually darkening it out. So I might drop the background fade just a little bit, maybe to 65. Now the first thing we can also see is we can't see the text. So why don't we change the text color? In the row settings, we can just go now to text color and change that over to white. And all of our text is now clearly seen. Now that is way more legible. One of the cool things you can do with background images too is if we want to add a bit more color on this side, but sort of darker on this side, we can add what is called a gradient, and we can change the fade direction. Here, if we go choose left, we can automatically see that there's darker on this side and lighter on this side because it's applying a gradient. We can actually change the fade distance, but in this case, I'm going to up the background fade just to 80, and I reckon that's working really well. It carries the life of the photo, but you can make some minor adjustments if needed to your heart's content. Now do notice this is a classic 2-column row. We have some heading text, some paragraph text, and some call to action buttons as well. But another way to do the row almost exactly the same would actually be centering this row. If we open up the rows, we can see all our options available. Now, if I was to do a center row where all the text and things are in the center, I wouldn't actually be using the long one because the content's going to be too wide on the screen. Kind of think of it why magazines have thin columns. It makes things readable. So I'm going to use this row, which is the first one, which is a really common one to use with header rows. So if I open this up, I can now paste in my content that I had on the previous one. I can now center the text, center the buttons, and already I'm off to a good start. But let's do the same. Let's add a little bit of vertical spacing, say 120, because this is the header, the hero image. We're going to change the background image. And I'm also this time going to change the background color to black, text to white, and also change this background fade so we can see it far more legible. Maybe 60 should do it. That is looking pretty cool. All right, so now we have this row, which is a common 2-column row, or this row, which is a center column row. Now, another classic one that we see with rows, which will be really helpful for you to understand as you do build out rows, let's just remove this one for the moment, is going to add a row with leaderboards. The reason is this is a good example of using this row type. One of the great principles in building in the page builder is to make sure every row kind of has a primary call to action. So let's add this new row, and I'm going to use one of these bottom ones. What these give me is the option to add a full width column, 2 half columns, and then another full width column. And I'll show you why this is important. So let's open up this one, and I've got some content in here happening. All right, let's just grab in my title again. I'm going to grab in my buttons, and on this one, as you can see, if I drag over, I can see the top column, half column, and then I've got another full column down the bottom. And I want to add these buttons right in there. Let's just center this. Awesome. And now I'm going to add in the leaderboard block. So let's open up leaderboards. Leaderboard, and I'm going to put one in this half column, and I'm going to copy another one into this half column. Now in the leaderboard block, like all blocks, you have settings. So let's just change those. Therefore, whole campaign profile is the individual fundraisers. Awesome. Let's open up this one, and we want to change these to team fundraisers. Another thing I'd like to do is I want to put some text just above each of these. So let's copy this, add that there. Copy this, add that there. Now, as you can see, the text is really not working in regards to its sizing. So let's just make a few little updates. Leaderboards. Oh. And here we can have individuals and teams. But in your design settings, you get to choose different heading sizes, which is basically works on a hierarchy. So let's open up this one, and I'm going to use heading 3 for this, because it's kind of just a subheading for leaderboards. And then on these ones, I'm going to use heading 5, which is nice and small, it's unobtrusive, and it's working really well. Awesome. Now that as a row is looking so much better. Now, some of the things to note is I've already got 30 pixels worth of margin on top of these buttons, which I don't really need now. So let's just remove that. Awesome. Okay, we've now got all of our content bits in the rows. So I'm just going to remove some of my little spaces because I don't need those. And I have my row content. Now, the main thing you'll see is we need some spacing help, and spacing help is in the row settings. So let's open up the row, go to advanced, and change our vertical spacing to 60, making these nice and consistent with every row that we have. You could use 40 if you want, which is by default. I typically use 60. The next one we want to do is go into our columns. And as you can see, I've got column 1, 2, 3, and 4. On these ones, a good principle of something like this would be on the first column, let's add some bottom margin of 60. On the fourth column, let's add some top margin of 60. And already we can see that the row has a lot more nice spacing around it, giving things room to breathe. One of the really important things to do though, when you are working in Razorly, is to understand the mobile view. Because what will happen if you open up, say, mobile and scroll down, you'll see that these are just bunted up against each other. And the reason for that is that on mobile, it's just compressing all of this into one column. And so adding some spacing for mobile can be really helpful. If we open up the settings, columns, and we're going to focus on column 2, I'm going to go to the mobile setting, change bottom margin to 30. What that means is if I go now into my mobile view, I can see I've now got a little bit of space between each of those. And this is going to be really important, say for example, if you stack images on different columns as well. So already we've got a great example of how you would create a row with different sort of sizing and content places there. Now there are some other common row things that you have, but a good principle is if you do use a 2-column row structure, stick with that. Don't suddenly use 3 columns. Don't suddenly use third columns and 2/3 columns, 1/3 columns. Stick with a 2-column or a single column layout. And that can be really, really helpful for you. But hopefully that gives you a good overview in regards to starting on how to create a really stunning row for your page.